Hello and welcome back to another episode. Indeed, welcome back to the shed for a follow-up that I sort of hinted at when I introduced you to this wonderful space a couple of weeks ago. And that is that I want to do the paint job on this mask, this Halloween style mask that I had already cut off the bottom. It was a full face mask, and I removed the I suppose the mandible from the skull using my Dremel, and gave it a primer coat of like a greyish white colour. And today I want to, I suppose, age it up a bit, make it look a bit more like actual bone for Halloween, and also for other work related purposes as well. So let's dive in. And I suppose the first thing that I really need to do is just to paint this nose black, or the space in there black. It sort of bothers me that there's a positive space and not a negative space. Yet if we were to cut it out of the middle there, we'd reveal, or cut into the sponge behind, which is crucial for protecting my little nose when I'm wearing the mask. It's true. So we're going to paint the middle bit there with some black, Chaos Black, my good old collection of Citadel colours coming in handy. There we go. Open up with my teeth. Excellent. And this is going to be a fairly rough around the edges, quick and dirty kind of paint job, because ultimately this isn't a legacy thing that I'm doing here. This is something for fairly practical purposes. But I want it to be quite neat, and I guess the best way to balance neatness and expediency is to keep it simple. So we've got a few choice colours that I'll be introducing as we go, and hopefully when I'm done I'll have a respectable looking skull mask. Not that this isn't already quite respectable looking. I mean, look at the thing. It's got some excellent character and texture, and crucially it actually fits my huge noggin. I have a unusually big head. That doesn't necessarily mean I have a big brain. Actually, one of my favourite quotes of all time is that having a university degree doesn't make you smarter by definition. Rather, it makes other people wonder how you could be so dumb as to be able to get that degree in the first place. Now, obviously, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but it was a glib quote from a fairly clever friend of mine, and I often reflect on that. I think to myself, well, you know, wisdom does count for something. If it wasn't for the collective wisdom of folks, I would never have started eating tomatoes for a start. So so yes, big heads don't necessarily mean smarts. But there we go. So the nose is painted black, although actually I suppose I could just spread that around a little bit in there. There we go. Okay, that'll do. Right, so rinse off my brush. Now I want to do a bit of a dry brushing on some of the raised ridges and details there, and for that I'm probably going to be using a combination of Avaland Sunset from my newer Citadel paints and Bronzed Flesh from my older Citadel paints. And dry brushing is actually a technique that I came across relatively late, I think, in my initial phase of painting, sort of in high school. I was doing lots of very watered down paints, trying to get details by creating layers, as indeed, you know, can you be a professional painter? Well, I suppose, yeah, as the professional Citadel and Gaze Workshop painters themselves do. And then a friend of mine sort of brought it to my attention, highlighted, I'm trying not to use the word highlight because dry brushing can be used for highlighting, but he did, no pun intended, highlight that that dry brushing was a great midway. You know, if you don't want to do museum quality paints for your entire army of Gretchen, for example, or Space Marines, then dry brushing is crucial. And I think, you know, for those 4 years that I was painting in high school, I think about well, maybe half of that time, I've been doing it the hard way. But then again, I always do things the hard way. Yeah, I'm not very good at making things easy for myself. Anyway, just gonna get some dry brush element on the brush here, brush most of the paint off, and just pass it over some of the really raised edges on our skull. I want it to be well, almost like a cartoon, I think, version of bone, which as an archaeologist, I've seen a lot of bone in my time. I've dug up a couple of skeletons. Actually, my first ever skeleton I dug up was before university. I was it was sort of on the summer of what became a gap year. Initially, I wasn't going to have a gap year, but long story short, I decided to become an archaeologist instead of going and doing art at a local college. And it was on an excavation in Cheshire, just outside North Wales, where I grew up, that I dug up my first skeleton. He was probably a priest, because he was buried, well, he was buried in a churchyard, but obviously lots of people are buried in churchyards. But he was buried specifically with his hands cupped like that. So his hands were sort of on his stomach, I guess, cupped, ready to rise up at the end of days to offer communion to his congregation. So he was buried in the opposite direction as well to other people in the graveyard, which was quite cool, I thought. And it's not necessarily the best form to do so, but we did name him. We gave him a sort of a provisional name of Fred. And I found that helpful, because actually when you're digging up a skeleton, it can become a little bit of a geometric exercise. It can become something that is kind of, you know, the knee bone's connected to the leg bone's connected to the hip bone, this kind of thing. And you're just spotting shapes in the ground. And also, actually, that can bias you as well. So you can start sort of missing where there's been damage to a bone, or even introduce damage to a bone that's not the shape that you expected it to be, by presuming what the shape is, or what shape is coming next in the order of things. So actually, in this case, Fred had seemingly been the victim of a bifurcation. So at some point after he had been buried, someone was digging another grave, approximately in the plot next to his. Didn't quite know where his grave was, and they cut him in half, down, well, not quite half, but he was missing sort of his left ribs. His left arm was gone in that instance. So presumably the gravedigger going, "Oh no! Oh crap! We dug up a skeleton." So they probably chucked the bones in with the spoil, and the priest and the family for that second burial were probably none the wiser. But his hands remained where they were, roughly above where his stomach would have been. So yeah, that's how we knew he was a priest. He also had beautiful teeth, and I'll come to the teeth on this in a bit. I've got a plan for the teeth. Beautiful teeth. And he seemingly had a very high milk and calcium intake in his diet, which is sometimes a bit unusual for priests, especially medieval priests. They often were big on fish, especially on, for example, holy days and feasts, saints' feasts and Fridays, this kind of thing. But no, he must have had a lot of milk in his diet, which is unsurprising, really, because the Cheshire Plains are known for their excellent grazing, ability to produce high quality milk and cheese. There we go. But actually, fun fact for you, while we're doing this, medieval priests got so fed up of eating fish all the time that they started to reclassify certain other animals as fish so they could eat them on feast days and not get into trouble. And so one of those animals that they reclassified was, well, first of all, they started with dolphins. Dolphins, shaking up the bronzed flesh now. Dolphins, obviously they're close to fish, but not really fish. And then they ended up reclassifying, I just want to make sure I get this right, I think water voles and otters. Again, you can see how they got there, but it also meant that they were getting a bit of cheeky meat in on their feast day diets as well. So a bit of bronzed flesh. Now, I'm not trying to make it look as though there is flesh on the skull. Again, it's just for highlighting purposes. And I always get a bit scared at this point in these sorts of paint jobs, because you can look as though you're really ruining it. You know, does this even look like a skull anymore? What am I doing? But I think we're going to be okay. Because again, what I want is for these highlights to show through on the dark night of Halloween, when we've got people coming to the door, getting their trick-or-treat, freak flag flying, and so a little bit of exaggeration I think is fine. Although I'm leaving the teeth, I think, more or less as they are for now. Next, I guess I think I'll just do a quick, gentle just rub over those areas, just to slightly dry them. Now, normally I would just wait, but I'm recording this on video, and as I say, this is a quick and dirty paint job. But I think that's going to mean that it has a character that I'm going to enjoy. Because also this could be a mask not just that's meant to be a skull, but also it could be a mask made by a crazed killer, you know, who doesn't really care about the finer details of the artistry of what they're doing. So so that's what that's the path I'm going down anyway with this. So next I'm going to go in with let me think. Yeah, some flesh wash from my classic Citadel paints, and the flesh wash is hopefully going to get into some of the cracks. I'm going to use a much bigger brush than you'd typically use, for example, on a Games Workshop model. Get into some of the cracks, and again just add some detail. Now this is where it really looks like I've made a terrible mistake. Looks like he's just head-butted a cow pat or something, doesn't it? But hopefully, I just do that first bit there. Hopefully, when I wipe this off, all will be fine. Fingers crossed. So here we go. Wipe it off. And the trick is to wipe off as much as you reasonably can. Yeah. As much as you reasonably can, and you're never going to be able to get it all off. Especially with the flesh wash, it tends to sort of slightly stain. But actually, bone in the ground isn't white. It has yellows and browns and all sorts of other colours. Not even just in the ground. Bone actually, after a time, sort of oxidizes, and it's no longer. Well, actually, it's called fresh bone, or even green bone. So again, it's one of those things where the cartoons sometimes lead us astray in terms of how we portray these sorts of things. And I know I said that I was aiming for something that's cartoony, but also, obviously, I'm an archaeologist, so I also want something that's a bit that smacks of cartoony authenticity. shall we say. There we go, that's sort of, yeah, get a bit bony. Bit bonier, if that's a word. Actually, we need to be careful with that word, don't we? Bonier. Bonier. So again, we're going quick and dirty. And I want to kind of leave a bit of a white hint around the eyes. So I'm not going to be too bothered about painting perfectly in that space around the eyes, because I want there to be, again, little highlights and things that kind of draw the eye. But I think, yeah, we're doing well. I mean, because ultimately, something that I've noticed just looking at myself in the mirror in this mask is that we are always drawn to the eye, aren't we? So in a horror movie, when the killer has a close-up, you wonder what's going on in that mask or behind the mask, because you can see, even if you get a flash of the human eyes, you think, how could they be doing this? How are they so inhumane? I think we're naturally drawn to the eyes for various very sensible reasons, you know. One of them being able to read another human being's intent, trust, all this kind of malarkey. Okay, and here actually the wash is becoming a bit more like a dry brush. That's absolutely fine, I think. So again, we're getting that sort of highlighting effect on raised ridges. But also, I don't want the bone to be perfectly uniform. You know, this isn't plastic. Well, no, it is plastic. Obviously, it is plastic, but I want it to look a bit more organic. There we go. Okay, cool. Yep, I like that. Let's put the brush in there to dry. Wipe some off here. Now this is a slightly smaller space than I would normally paint in, but today, to be honest, I was tempted to paint obviously on the Warhammer model painting area that I set up earlier this year, but I really wanted to paint in the shed. You know, give the shed its another little taste of actual craft work, and plus I just like being in here. And who wouldn't? It's a wonderful, wonderful place. So let's try that. How are we looking? Okay. Now I'm going to go in with my Agrax Earthshade. This is a newer Citadel wash. It's a double-sized bottle because I've been using it quite a lot on my Space Marines, and it's a pretty good wash. I like it. It's got that tendency, as all good washes do, to find the cracks. And with this one, I'm not going to be as liberal as I was with the Flesh wash. I'm going to really expect this wash to flow and to find the nooks and the crannies, and to continue to make some of these details stand out. There we go. Now the inside of the nose there, I've been avoiding it because the black hasn't fully dried, and again, if I wasn't painting this on camera, I would have waited before doing these extra layers and washes. But that's why I'm being a little bit shy of going too much in there. But I've just sort of put a bit of the Agrax shade around the nose. And actually that could work to my benefit. It darkens, but also it remains a little bit light. Again, a bit of a highlight there in the original undercoat of the skull, around the blackness of the void of the nose. So lacking uniformity, which is good. We're creating points of interest and focus. And also there's that element of because clearly for this sort of mask you want it to be a bit surprising, don't you? So I think just anything that just adds a bit of character, that takes this away from being obviously a toy, and even just for a moment that it looks a bit more like a bone, I think it's going to be a bit of fun on Halloween. So I suppose since I've started talking about bones and being an archaeologist, it's probably worthwhile, some of you may be wondering or curious, talking about the fact that you can't just go and dig up a body. It's one of the questions that people often ask archaeologists is, where's the limit? What's the limit, man? What's the difference between you and a grave robber? And one of the key limits, especially for example in Britain, is licensing. So it's not that you need a license to be able to excavate, although you should be a qualified archaeologist if you want to be handling human remains. But first of all, if you find a body, you have to go to the Home Office, and they will issue you a license that stipulates various things. Now, one of those is contingent on it not being a recent burial, or indeed an illicit burial. There have been instances where archaeologists have come across murdered people who've been hidden in the woods or something. And so actually the very first thing that you do is you contact the police, and the police come along, and together you decide, is this a recent burial, is this linked with any missing persons cases? More often than not, what happens, or what is basically the case, is that the police turn up and say, okay, are you pretty sure that this is an ancient burial or a historic burial? And the archaeologist walks them through and describes in some detail the context of the burial, why it's likely to be ancient. Often you can tell because of the quality of the bone or the artifacts that are found with the skeleton, this kind of thing. And when the police are satisfied, and often actually what ends up happening is the police have a little site tour, and they go, oh, we found any treasure? When they're satisfied, you can approach the Home Office and ask for this license. And the license stipulates things that are actually kind of in some cases left over from sort of Victorian and Georgian proprietary rules. It's all to do with how you display, or rather shield from the public, the remains that you're dealing with. So a lady can't walk past and be scandalized, when she sees a skeleton in the ground. You shield the remains from public view as you're excavating them. Often this means putting up a little tent or a small fence around the site. You commit to studying them, and where possible, returning them to the ground in a suitable way. So, for example, Fred, the medieval priest, was probably reburied at an abbey somewhere in Scotland. Obviously, it's nowhere near where he was buried, but it is as close to the rites and the religious function of that burial as we were able to replicate today. And also, of course, you need to promise to be respectful of the remains at all times. That's a key part of the license as well. So yeah, so you can't. I have been asked a couple of times, can I just go and dig people up? No, you cannot just go and dig people up. There are protections in place. Okay, so that's looking okay. It's still a little bit wet, but I think we can move on to the teeth without too much hassle. And the teeth I want to do something really simple, and that is, first of all, I want to reinforce their whiteness, because actually often teeth in the ground, especially so if this is a skeleton that's been buried and then brought back to life, or if this is someone who's been grave robbing, teeth in the ground are often remarkably white, and this is because of the enamel on the teeth. And the enamel lasts very well. It's a very hard and hardy substance. This is why the dentists ask you to look after your teeth, to protect that enamel for as long as possible. And so actually on a skeleton, the teeth are often stunningly pristine, and often actually medieval teeth are much better than modern teeth. And obviously if this was a lecture or a classroom setting, I'd be asking the students, any ideas? Hands up. But the simple answer is sugar, access to sugar. Post, I don't know really, I suppose post Norman era Britain especially started to have more and more sugars in their diets. But as we approach, for example, the Tudor era and onwards, sugar cane became more and more common through plantations and intercontinental travel, and so tooth decay. You absolutely see a rise in tooth decay. Prior to so much sugar being in people's diets, the biggest issue was bread. It was the bread that they ate every day, because the bread was ground by hand, and often this meant using a local, not pristine piece of granite, but a chunk of stone, any hunk of stone. You grind it up, either in your local mill or at home. The daily grind is probably where the phrase comes from, and that means sand and grit gets into your flour, and then your bread ends up really coarse and dry, and it wears your teeth flat. So the lumps and bumps, the cusps of your teeth disappear. So flat, pristine, beautiful, pearly teeth are often a sign of people from older times. Now this, I'm afraid, I'm going to have to let dry. I absolutely need to let this dry because I can't add the next stage to it just yet. So let's give this a few minutes.
11 minutes later.
Yes, a mere 10 minutes later or thereabouts. I had intended on leaving this mask for more like half an hour to an hour, but actually today I'm feeling a little bit impatient. I know patience is a virtue, but also actually something else occurred to me, and that was to do with the teeth on this mask. You see, I do want them to stand out. I want them to be relatively pearlescent compared to the bone of the skull, but I also want them to stand out in another way. I want them to have definition, and to that end, what I've actually started doing is applying watered down black paint, dabbing it onto the teeth where the teeth meet the gum line, and also between the teeth, so that we get the black resting in those spaces there. It does initially look a bit messy, but again, with a bit of a judicious wipe of the teeth, we get our pearlescent surfaces back, or slightly grayer, but certainly now more defined white shiny surfaces back. And I think that looks so much better on the skull. You can actually see the teeth, whereas I did notice before on camera the teeth were, well, they were indistinct, shall we say. So I'm much happier with that as the look. And actually I think the same applies to this area here. This section actually hasn't turned out quite as well as I wanted it to. I wanted it to be a bit more a bit more defined. So we're going to, instead of relying on the wash, which was just falling more or less off the plastic, I'm going to slightly water down some black paint and dab it onto those areas and get some of that definition that I've been looking for. Now it's times like this that I start to feel like I'm talking like a makeup artist. Oh yes, yes, darling, we need some definition. We need to bring out your eyes and this kind of thing. And actually, I suppose there is a certain amount of crossover with how people talk about makeup and costuming and this kind of thing. And this sort of painting, where what you're going for is effect. You're not looking to be subtle. You're going for how does it read? How does it come across to the viewer? And so it's kind of funny. Two things that I always thought were slightly silly things to do was, first of all, as a filmmaker, doing that all the time, framing things up. I thought that was a really pretentious, daft thing to do, but I do it all the time in work. And the second thing is, when it comes to things like painting, talking about definition and this idea of, oh yeah, I buy that, how does that sell on camera, all this sort of stuff. You fall into it, you really do. But that's because, again, we come back to this idea of wisdom. There is collective wisdom in some of this terminology. It's not just people being pretentious. The wisdom of others. You should never discount people's wisdom. They'll always question their intelligence. Definitely. Always be ready to say, I'm not sure that person is as smart as they think they are. Because often they're not. Okay, so we're looking okay. This is coming together quite well. I think that now what I want to do is to approach the teeth with that final step, and that's going to involve the use of some gloss coat. Now, the gloss coat is a different paint compared to the other paints I've got here. It's not water based, so there is a gloss coat thinner that I have to use to clean my brush after I'm done. But what it should do compared to the rest of the mask, it should leave me with that sort of shiny effect on the teeth compared to the slightly dirtier bone on the rest of the skull. I'm a little bit nervous about applying it this morning in the context of the mask being still a little bit wet, but I think we're going to be okay. So today I'm going to use where's my small brush? Oh, there it is. Small brush. And we're going to just apply this gloss to these teeth. Now, this paint actually is very similar to the old school model paints that my dad used to use on sort of aeroplanes and model warships, this kind of thing. So there was a whole collection of paints that he had associated with the model of the Mary Rose, the Tudor ship, the famous one that went down soon after being launched in the English Channel. And I always found his paints to be weird because they smell. They are definitely more. They have more of a toxic kind of quality to them. But in the case of this gloss, it's just the best way to get that sort of glossy shininess onto a project like this. Took me a little bit of time actually to find a gloss paint that I was happy with, because I didn't want a tiny little bottle, but I also didn't want buckets of the stuff, and so this is actually a much larger bottle than most that I could find. And as I say, it came with its own bespoke thinner, which meant that I could have a bit of control over how and when my brushes got gunked up by it. Just going to do the underside of the teeth as well, just here, with the gloss. And it is a bit of a risk making the teeth so shiny, But again, I think, because to the eye at the moment, they look too shiny. But I think, again, I think at night, and I think when you're not so close to the mask as you are when you're painting it, the teeth will just have that extra little thing that makes you think, what is that? Is that real? Just for a second. And that's really all I want. It's just a brief moment. And I think you can just about there you go, the gloss on the teeth is working quite well. I mean, yes, I know the inside the nose is still wet there, that's still shiny, but that shine on the teeth is the gloss. Cool. Now this brush, I need to remember, I need to apply the thinner, and the thinner is in the house.
A few moments later.
So that's that handled. It's really important not to let the gloss dry on the brush, otherwise you might as well just throw the brush away. That said though, the gloss thinner cycle isn't the best for the brush either, so you need to choose some sacrificial brushes, or some brushes which are really good in terms of that nice flat finish for this purpose. And just know that while you can prolong the life of the brush using the thinner, it's going to have a shorter lifespan than most brushes in your model painting collection. Incidentally, I've continued that process of adding some thinned down black paint to the mask and rubbing off excess to try and I suppose create highlights by deepening the contours between the higher parts of the mask. And I'm quite liking the effect that we're getting. It's possibly gone slightly further in the other direction than compared to where it was, but again, I think that's okay. I think what we're after here is a mask that has initial impact, and along with the gloss on the teeth and the realistic bone shades, I think a little bit of exaggerated contours and highlighting will really help to have that initial jump that I'm after when I open the door at Halloween. I think I'm quite happy with this. Yes, I could have been a little bit more patient. I could have taken a day or two to get this absolutely perfect, but for what this is, for a quick and dirty paint job, I'm happy. Now, one thing actually that does occur to me is I want to just add a little bit of extra black in this kind of area, because after all, this part of the skull is concave. It absolutely comes away from the side of the brow there, and I think that's quite nice. That works. Again, in terms of colour, it's creating that sense of contour, like a surface that looks a bit more concaved than the surface around it. I think that's good. So let's do the same just over here. There we go. And again, I think this use of a brush, well, again, this is almost dry brushing. We're almost back to dry brushing here, but this use of a brush that's been loaded with paint and watered down a little bit is working quite well as well. There we go. Yeah, nice. I keep on forgetting that the teeth aren't fully dry yet, so my fingers are getting a little bit sticky there. Let's see, that side compared to this side, I'll just tidy that up a little bit. There we go. Maybe just wipe off on the raised areas there. Okay, and I think one more thing will really help this mask, and that is a final pass with some white in some dry brushed highlights. I think that's all that we're missing here. I think we've lowered the whole thing down into like a brown sort of quagmire of different colours. I think we can't rely on the light here that we have to be highlighting these highlights. So a little bit of white, I think, in select places, but on a very, very dry brush is what we're after. That's what the doctor calls for. Shake this up. There we go. Go with this brush here. Again, these are far larger brushes than I would normally use, for example, for model painting. But for something on this scale, I think it's fine. Just test that on my finger. Yeah, I think it's okay. And just literally, just want to just catch some of the edges. There we go. On the brow, just around the side of the eye, just there. Yeah, that's good. And again, I suppose it's that sort of exaggerated feel that I'm after, almost like the skull is frowning, I suppose. There we go. And of course, on these raised bits here, that's pretty good. So we're raising up the raised portions. We're making the deeper portions that bit deeper. Canyons and hills, or canyons and mountains. That's what we're going for. I feel like I'm a step away from becoming a Bob Ross type figure. Happy little canyons, happy little mountains. I think that mountain has a friend. Let's paint that friend just here. Incidentally, this whole thing of ASMR, I know Bob Ross isn't ASMR, but you see it a lot on YouTube at the moment. That's never had an effect on me. It's never been a thing for me. And I don't get it. I mean, I've looked into it, I've read about it and what people report when it comes to their ASMR experiences. And I think the closest I've ever got to that has been something called alpha waving, which is where you sort of, I guess you're in a sort of a trance-like state. Often it used to happen to me when I was a kid and I was almost falling asleep, and I'd get this sensation that my arms and legs were really, really far away from my body, if that makes any sense, as though my legs had stretched, and my it was a strange sensation, but it was similar to how people describe ASMR. You had this slight sense of euphoria, as though you were sort of somehow leaving a particular plane of existence. But yeah, ASMR, listening to dogs chewing, or I don't know, turtles chewing on fruit, or people whispering. It's just not my thing, it seems. It just doesn't quite work. And I think we are done for the day. It's not perfect. It is a quick and dirty job, but somebody had to do it, and today I'm quite happy with how this turned out. I'm really pleased that we managed to lower down these ridges here. The wash just wasn't resting on the plastic very well at all. I think the wash is much better with a Citadel model. Who would have thunk it? But considering I could have spent a bit more time doing this, I'm happy with this. I quite like the way the sides here turned out. I might add a little bit more of this sort of darkening to sort of under here, perhaps, just to sort of bring out the sides. But then, the fact that you have the gloss and the shine on the teeth as well of the skull, is something that appeals to me as an archaeologist, but also I think that will have that subtle effect when this is in sort of full costume mode in Halloween. I like it. Thank you for joining me here in the shed to paint a skull mask. It's been fun. Hopefully you've enjoyed yourselves as well. And as ever, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.